Okay, so now we are doing chapter 9, which is CRUD with Firebase. In this chapter, we'll cover how to implement full CRUD operations in React with the backend server. So we will explore using Firebase as our backend server. Firebase is Google's real-time database, which offers a very powerful backend platform for building fast and scalable real-time apps. Firebase provides us with a real-time, fast and scalable NoSQL database in the cloud, and we use a library to talk to this database. So this allows us to focus on building our application according to requirements rather than debugging server-side code. Right, so the first thing that we're going to do obviously is to create a Firebase account, right? And then after that we are going to use this script to reference the Firebase SDK. Firebase.js gives us a library to work with Firebase, as you can see the script that we have here. And then to illustrate connecting Firebase to our React app, we will create a new project using create React, right? And we need to add React Bootstrap to our project also, right? So we use this command here, and then we will next use npm to add Firebase to our project using npm install Firebase. And then in our index.js of the of the project we just created, we have to add these lines here, right? So these are the properties, the credential properties in Firebase config that will be our own, right? So if I go to my index.js, we have this variable here, config, and that's the API key, everything that you get from your own account, right? And then in our app.js, we are going to make sure that we have added Firebase correctly to our project. So we go to app.js and we add the lines below, import Firebase, right? And then you log this to your console and you should see this. And then after that, you just have to make sure that your dashboard on your Firebase, you can see all the changes that you're making. And then if you want to display a list of users, we will show how to display a list of users, but before that we need to have an existing user data in our Firebase. So we will use user data from JSON placeholder from this URL here, and it will provide us with fake online REST API and data for testing, right? And then in our user.js, we'll create a user component to display our list of users. We're gonna create user.js, and then in the source folder with the following code that we have here, as you can see, we create that component with that value and snapshot, right? So we import Firebase and use it to access our database node in component date mount. Remember that component date mount is called after the first render of the component. This is where server requests and state updates should occur, right? And then in component date mount, we specify the location of a node in a Firebase as an argument to the Firebase database .ref method to retrieve our list of users. Firebase.database provides us with a Firebase database service interface, and its ref method returns the location in the database corresponding to the provided path, right? So if our list of users is a child node under the parent node GitHub, we would then have something like this. Then we listen for data changes at our specified location by providing a callback function to the on method. And yes, this is how we read data from a database. We'll have a callback function that's triggered for the initial data, and again, whenever the data changes, that is when we edit or delete a user, the callback will be triggered and we will have the updated list. So in our case, this is what it's gonna look like if we try to log it to the console, right? And then if we run our app, we can't see any data, or we'll get an error saying something like permission denied, client does not have permission to access the desired data. This is because in Firebase, our Firebase permission rules are currently configured like this, and we need to change this, right, to true. And then we'll convert the returned single object to an array to help us iterate through the data easier by adding the code below here in our component did mount. As you can see, we return into that array, and then we declare an empty array, return array, and for each object data in snapshots we retrieve with data.val, we then assign the key property value to the user object. So the key property will be important for us later when we use it to retrieve a single specific object from the Firebase for deletion and update, right? And that's what we have here. And then in our user.js render, we are going to implement our template in render of user.js, and we're going to make sure that we have installed React Bootstrap with the following command in the terminal, and we'll reference the table's code, and in user.js we'll implement this in our render like this, right? So we'll have a table in our render method, as you can see here, right? This populates the table rows with database objects, and then for this to be successful we have to import table with the import statement at the top. As you can see, we imported table, and then we go to our app.js, and in our app.js we have to create the routing configuration, right? And we have to import user and browser router, and we have our app, as we can see, like this. And in our render we add this browser router here, and then yeah, we go back to our user.js, where we will implement adding a user to our app by adding a button add user just before the user list in user.js, and we'll edit and decorate it with BS style primary as shown in the code below, as you can see here, right? This is in our user.js, and then we have to import button from React Bootstrap, as you can see here. And then when we click this button, we route to a new page with a form to add a new user. To create this route, we have to implement the add method in user.js. As you can see here, we have the add method, and then in app.js we're going to import and add the path to user form component, as we can see here, right? We import user form, and then we add this route here with the path, and then we're gonna go to userform.js and create the new component userform.js that implements a form field, username and email as shown, right? So in our userform.js, this is the code that we are going to have here, and it's gonna be a form field with a username and email. So we want to focus on submit, which is called by the form upon submission. And to add an object to Firebase, we use the push method from our firebase.database.ref, which we covered earlier in the listing. And then when we want to delete a user, we want to do this by clicking on the delete icon in a row of the user list, following which a delete dialog box will appear asking us if we want to delete the user. So in our user.js, to implement this, we first add two properties, show delete dialog and selected user in our component state. As you can see here, we have show delete dialog and a selected user, and in our show delete dialog, which is false, and selected user is an empty object, we decide when to show a delete dialog, and when it's false we don't show the delete dialog. So we bind the onClick event of the delete button to the open delete dialog method with the user object from Firebase as an argument. Then we implement the open delete dialog method, as you can see here, and then we just our open delete dialog simply says show delete dialog to true when the delete dialog in which will be implemented in render later. So for the delete dialog, we make sure we use the modal component, and this is how you just install it from Bootstrap. And then we're gonna set the show attributes of modal to this state.show delete dialog. The modal will only show when this .state.show delete dialog is true. Then we specify the descriptions we want to appear in the header and in the body as shown in the above. And then our modal footer, we bind delete and delete button and close delete dialog to the close button, as you can see here, right? A close delete button, and then we close delete dialog sets the state show delete dialog to false to hide the modal, and set the selected user to null, as you can see here. And then lastly, we're gonna bind our close delete dialog and delete method with the code that we have here, right? So to populate the form on edit, in our app.js we're going to define a new route, edit id, with the parameters as shown below, and it's gonna be app.js, and then in our user.js we're gonna add a router link to the edit icon with the parameter user.key used to retrieve a user object and populate our form. And in our user form.js we're gonna add the following code here, right? And then we're gonna implement the component did mount method as shown below, and then we're gonna make the following changes in our formic code: enable reinitialize to true, and then our username is going to be this.state.username, and email is this.state.email. So when we want to update a user, we make some code changes and additions to the onSubmit in userform.js, and we're gonna fill in the code as you can see here. So that's what our onSubmit needs to look like. And then in summary, in this chapter we learned how to implement CRUD operations using Firebase as our backend. We learned how to add Firebase to our application and how to work with the Firebase database from the Firebase console, and how to display a list of users, how to add a user with the push method, and how to delete a user with the remove method, retrieve a single Firebase object to prepare our form for edit, and how to update a user. So I was the driver and Asanda was my navigator. Thank you.